Hello, welcome back to the LOOC. This is Ben Geisler. I'm going to be describing for you in this video 7.9 how to make menus. This is the menu that Microsoft gave us, the shooter menu. What we're going to do here is we're going to add a start button and we're going to add an exit button. I'm hoping that the addition of these buttons will show you how to make buttons, as well as how to draw onto the screen and make those buttons actually work in your game. So let's go ahead and get started. As I said, this is the shooter JPEG. I've gone out on the net and found some other, I'm sorry, that's not JPEG, that's a PNG. I've gone out on the net, I've found some other PNGs for the start button and the exit button. This is the start button that we'll be using, and the exit button is here, called N-button, just a little X thing. So those were pre-created just from the net. All I did was I did a right-click add existing item, and I just selected these, and then they showed up under shooter content, which is what you want. So if I run the game now, I can show you where we're going, and I'll show you how to get there as well. So I'm going to go to Start Debugger, and you'll see that it now comes up with this Start button here and Exit. If I hit Exit, it ends, and if I hit Start, it starts out the game, and I can play the game. So ideally, I'd have an end screen as well, maybe an intro dialogue type screen. That's one of the things I put on that you could do, but you could do that yourself with this knowledge that I'm about to share with you. So let's take a look at Beyond Compare and see all the file changes that were made in this newest version. Changes have been made to basically just game1 .cs, and there's been quite a few changes in game1 .cs. I'm just going to scroll through to give you the full kind of glimpse of these changes. Here's the menu section, which now has and I'm going to go through this again, a detailed walkthrough of the code, but this has a start button and exit button main menu background. A loading screen is loading, a new enum. And again, I'll describe this all in detail, but for now I'm just kind of scrolling through it so you get a full picture of what's all here. A new game state has been added. We've made the mouse visible. We've got positions for the start and exit button, loading those up. And then down here, there's going to be some content. Oops. This is just going, okay, now there's a mouse clicked function. You can use this function as if you want. This is kind of a useful function that basically takes and creates a mouse clicked rectangle of size 10 by 10, and it moves it around the screen with you. And then when you click, it's going to do an intersection check here, and that will actually check if the mouse is within the button range of the thing that you have clicked. If it is, then we get the mouse state back as clicked, and we go ahead and change to the next screen, which is the start of the game. So that is about it. Actually, the draw down here is where we actually draw the main menu. So now I'm going to start from scratch here and go through the entire code base set of changes. But basically the way this is working is it's kind of like a state machine. So you've got the start. I've got an enum here actually that describes this pretty well. It's the first thing I want to focus on when describing this code. So I've got this enum game state that I've made. Right? And so what this is doing is we start at the start menu. Then eventually we're going to go to a loading screen, which is something I mentioned that you could add as a loading kind of intro screen. Then you go to the playing state. Then from there you go to the paused state. Each one of these states has its own code. The start menu state will basically draw the start menu. So if I write down here what it's going to do, it's going to draw the state, or I'm sorry, the start menu. Eventually the loading screen would be responsible for drawing, loading, or intros. You know, kind of like those games that have intro loading screens or loading movies. Playing would be the game itself. paused would be a pause state. Back to drawing a paused screen. Also, when we get to playing, when we first get to playing, we're going to initialize it. When we first get here, we're going to initialize it. And that's about it. So we're going to draw this when the state is start menu. We're going to draw the start menu and do nothing else. That's an important part of this. And then in loading, we also do nothing else. We don't do any updates until we get to the playing game state. And then at that stage, we initialize it when we first get here and run the update loop. So that's the overall picture of the game states that we're going to be using. And now I'm going to go through and show those to you. So we start out up at the top creating this game state. That's an enum. And an enum is basically just an array with finite values. So it's got the values start menu, loading, playing, and paused. And each one of those is basically an int, but it's just a named int. And then we're going to create a private game state for it. Game state means that that's the running version of the game has a current game state. So it's going to be like start menu, loading, playing, or paused. Also, we need to add textures for the start button and exit button and main menu background, as well as the loading screen. I'm actually not coding this up yet, but I put that there for you for later. As well as an isLoading boolean, a mouse state so we know if we've clicked anything, a previous state, and then a position for both the start button and the exit button. So once we've done that and we've created our game state, the next thing that I did was I added the start button position as basically the graphics.viewport.width divided by 2 minus 130. That's a hard-coded number there that specifically fits my image, my start image, which you can tell when you go to contents. When I go to shooter content, I can take a look at this start button. I can right-click on it, go to properties, go to details. It's 298 by 147. So, you know, roughly half of this width will be on the left-hand side of that that marker, and the other half will be on the other side. So realistically, maybe I should have made this like 145 or something, but basically divide that by 2, that number that you have there, by about 2, roughly, and that should be what a good spot for your start menu is, or your start button rather. Because basically each half of that is going to be on each side of the division line. And then 250, you know, that's up to you where you want to put that. The exit button, I just moved it over a little bit from the edge of the screen by doing graphics.viewport.width minus 30 and then down about 50 units. I also set is mouse visible to true so you can see the mouse right away when you first start. And then there's not really much else down here in the initialize. Then we go on to the menu, and in the menu, or I'm sorry, load content. Load content needs to load the menu. So we do start button equals content.load texture 2D, start dash button. Start dash button, as I mentioned before, is down here. So is end dash button. And then we basically say next in the next thing we want to do is inside of update we want to wait to see if we've got a mouse click. So as I said, we're actually going to start the state out in, I'm going to put a bookmark here. If you ever want, by the way, this is a really underutilized feature of Visual Studio. You can hit Control-K twice and you get a bookmark, which is nice because if you're somewhere up here and you want to hit that bookmark again, you can hit Control-A or Control-K, Control-N, and it takes you back to that bookmark. So if you're way up here and I want to get back down to the update, I can hit Control-K, Control-N, and I'm back down to mouse clicked, which is nice because what I'm going to do first is I'm going to show you where this game state is being set. It's actually being set in the constructor for the game. The reason I set it in the constructor here, I set the state to start menu. is because we're going to call initialize again. Initialize is initially called, but I'm going to recall it as soon as that button's pressed so I get the correct positions for my player and my enemies. Alternatively, I could have made a load function that would do everything that initialize did, and that might have been a little bit more of a proper way to do it. And if you want to make a load function, you can. You'll end up having some duplicate code, or what you could do is you could have initialize call load and have all the load stuff in there. But for now, this is good enough. So what we're going to do is we basically say get the mouse state, and oh wait here. If game state is playing and it's loading, then we're going to initialize finally. Otherwise, if it's start menu, we're just going to return. And we won't do any of this update stuff. Remember, this is all the work here. This is doing the player, the enemies, the collision, the projectile. We're not going to do any of that. We're just going to simply go on beyond that. And so this shortcuts, or this disconnects basically the entire thing if the start menu is showing. So in order to get away from that, we need to click on the start button. So in order to do that, we need a mouse clicked function. This mouse click function, you might want to just grab this wholesale when I upload the project, because this is going to be pretty useful for you. What it does is it creates a rectangle 10 by 10. Mouse clicked rect equals rectangle 10 by 10. And if I'm in the start menu, then it basically says, okay, give me a rectangle for the start button that starts at the start button position.x and goes for 298 to 147, which again, that's the size of my start button, is 298 by 147. And then I say exit button.position x and exit button.position y, and this is the size of my exit button. So if I've pressed within those, if I pressed anywhere within those, it's going to exit. So for example, when I run this, this is that region here that's available to press. And in here, there's a region that's defined by a rectangle around this start button that's available to press. Each of those will actually do something. In the case of hitting the start button, we're going to basically say that the game state is now playing, which means in that function I showed you before, we will get past that if statement and continue on. We're also going to say that it's currently loading, and that'll cause us to reload the content. Otherwise, we're going to exit if we are pressed within that exit button rect. So if the game state is playing and it's loading, then we initialize, and this is basically our load. Initialize right here is basically our load. That's what I was mentioning to you before could theoretically be a new function called load, which would just be called from initialize, and then we'd recall it down here. But it's fine as it is, so I'm just going to leave it. And it'll probably be fine for your game as well. And so then I just say is game state playing is loading, so it'll bypass this if statement, and it'll go on and it'll do what it needs to do with the rest of the game. The last thing we really need to be able to do is to draw the actual menu. And so if game state is start menu, again, I'm going to early exit out of this entire draw function. If that's the case, I'm just going to put a return down here, but not before I call the base class for draw and end the sprite batch. So that's kind of going from the bottom up. From the top down, we just do a basic sprite batch.draw on the menu background, which again, this is the Microsoft provided. Oops, wrong one. This is the Microsoft provided background called the shooter. And then I also draw the start button and I draw the exit button. So it's only going to draw this stuff. It's not going to draw the player or the enemies or anything like that until I'm out of the start menu state. And that's about it. So we've got a very simple state machine that runs our game, and we've got a menu. Now you can go on to create as many menus as you want. You'd basically just have a new enum variable for each menu that you would have, each screen you would have. If you wanted, you could even use this general framework to display a sequence of items. So if, for example, if you're making an RPG and you've got kind of a dialogue tree, you could make it using this same kind of logic, because basically the game state that you're drawing here for the background, you could say if game state equals start menu, then draw this. If game state equals screen 1, draw this. If game state equals screen 2, draw this, and have a bunch of different backgrounds in there. In other words, you could change your game states to look something like, you could have like a dialogue tree states, and it could be first, contact, conversation, reply, second statement from NPC, and you could go on and on like that, and that could essentially be your dialogue tree. Might be kind of an inefficient way of doing it if you have a ton of dialogue in your game, but since this is a shoot 'em up, I'm assuming that if people do story and they've got some kind of a chain like this telling the story, it's going to be pretty simple. It's going to be just a matter of one screen shows, then another screen shows, and that kind of thing, and you can click from each subsequent screen. So that's just sort of one possible way of doing it. Not really as much of a dialogue tree as more of an interactive story kind of experience. So that's about it for now. I'm going to sign off. If you've got any questions about this content, please let me know, and I will talk to you next week, if not sooner. Also, remember to sign up for the on-site visit. We're going to be doing some exciting things in class on that day on-site in the labs, doing some game project stuff for Project 2. So talk to you later.